There's no question that when Hogarth is doing his incredible engravings and his paintings, they are remarkable, but they are too everyday for the idea of art that is to lift the spirit. And that isn't what Hogarth does with his art. He makes art to make you see what he wants you to see.
He's a mirror of his age. It's a prism through which we see the 18th century. Strong characters, strong stories, a man with a heart, with a conviction, a man that marries art and social commentary and politics.
Hogarth is a man of his time. So he does things, he wants to show people what he sees to be the immoralities of life. He wants to show people the vices that he sees around him. And he wants everyone to be in a socially ordered society because he believes that will be good for Britain as a whole.
He's a campaigner. You read his paintings like books, and they're worth reading because they have things that are worth saying still, about charity, about compassion, about non-cruelty, about care. Ultimately, we admire Hogarth because he has a soul and a heart, and he's on the side of those things which are important. William Hogarth, he's born on the edge of the city of London by St Bartholomew's, a place of great character. There was the great hospital from the 12th century, the great church of St Bartholomew's, a crowded area, mixed of course, tradesmen, but a certain amount of poverty.
Well, Hogarth is born into what we would call today a bourgeois family. At the time would have been known as a middling sort family. His father was a teacher and also a publisher, somebody who wanted to publish in Latin. So at that time in London, there were masses of new people flooding into the city.
I mean, London became a place that enticed people in. And London at that period, in the very early 18th century, is a tremendous hive of activity, not just through trade, but the city is expanding. The city is rebuilt after the fire in miraculous speed, in fact. These great city churches are going up. St Paul's is completed in 1711, massive buildings. It had almost a violent atmosphere, fatally attractive. People came in from the country to find their fortunes in London, but often they found nothing but dismay and poverty. London was inspiring.
A lot of young women, a lot of young men, because there was war, constant kind of war really. It was a very metropolitan place, lots of people from other countries, lots of other languages spoken, all that sort of thing. So it was kind of pretty exciting place in many ways.
That's the world he was born into one of the great cities of the world. But you have to bear in mind, he has a very troubled upbringing. His father is learned but poor. He's a teacher of Latin, a scholar. He tries to make a living opening a coffee house. It fails.
The great disaster for Hogarth in his early life was that his father obviously couldn't manage his income and his family and ended up being imprisoned for debt. What happens is that his father will have been imprisoned because his debtors will have wanted to secure literally his father's body to enforce payment of the debts that he owed. Obviously, it was completely counterproductive because once he's in, prison, how's he gonna make any money? And so then it does become very incumbent on the family to go begging, basically, to try and get enough money to release him from prison.
Is it that they went to the Fleet, which is a great jail, a huge jail, ancient jail, Fleet Street and Farringdon Street, on where the River Fleet was. If you were in jail, the Fleet, you were allowed to live outside the Fleet if you had enough money. I mean, this sounds a paradox. Debtor jails were okay if you had access to some money. You'd buy off the prison guards and you could live outside the jail, which is what they did. It was a boundary area which you could occupy.
So the family, first of all, have to provide enough money to pay the jailer so that the husband can have some food and drink, and all that has to be paid for. Sometimes there's accommodation as well. Secondly, they have to obviously set up their home. They have to go and live near the prison. He eventually comes out to live with them. And then they constantly got to try and make up that money.
He grew up in this strange atmosphere. His father imprisoned, no money, putting part of the underclass, no education.
And the shame of that was huge, clearly, for Hogarth. And, you know, people have said about Hogarth that this had a big impact on his approach to life. And he was determined never to let that happen to him.
But nevertheless, you know, the father does get out, and he does get the money to send young Hogarth off to be an apprentice.
I mean, Hogarth would have hoped that he was going to go to university. His father was an educated man and a teacher, but of course he has to abandon all hope of that because there's no money in the family. So he's forced to undertake an apprenticeship. This was very common at the time, to go off at about, you know, sort of 13 or 14 usually, to go off to be an apprentice.
We do not know what talents young Hogarth had shown, but clearly some feeling towards the arts, because he's apprenticed to an engraver, to a man called Ellis Gamble. Quite a humble trade. He was engraving visiting cards, book plates, and so on, and engraving, you know, silver, knives and forks with heraldry.
But we don't really know very much about what he did during that apprenticeship, as far as one can tell from the literature. I mean, as you know, most people think of English art as pretty rubbish until Hogarth. And certainly that's true of the 17th century. You get the odd one that is highlighted as being good. But that is because there's no official training for artists, particularly. So there's no official training for how to draw. There's no official school for design or anything like that. So it means that William Hogarth, like other artists of the time, Thomas Bewick would be another example, they simply have a great eye and they just find themselves drawing. And he just draws from life. He often says that he draws from nature, he draws from life, he was inspired by the things he could look at. He was just a person who could draw.
And what we do know about Hogarth at this period, when he's aged late teens, I suppose, he develops a passion, a love of London. This is a characteristic thing about Hogarth. He walks the streets of London with his sketchbook. He observes characters, he observes situations. All this stuff, of course, feeds into his work later on. You wonder where it comes from. It comes from observation, from being a Londoner and loving the city and walking its streets. So he has this parallel life. He's a humble engraver's assistant, apprentice, but he's observing and loving London. And clearly he gets politicised. He develops a genuine and long-lasting sympathy for those who are suffering in this great active city of London, the underclass, the outcasts. And these must have been the people he saw, the beggars, the prostitutes, the poor children living on the streets being cast aside. He feels strongly about these issues, and he realises that he can use art to make a difference, to make a commentary, not just satire. Beyond that, you know, he wants to change things, and this is a thread through his work later on that is consistent and admirable and long-lasting. And so in 1720, he leaves his apprenticeship, set up in business by himself as an engraver.
So he sets up a shop, and one of the things that's really interesting about Hogarth is that he engraves what's called a trade card. So these are kind of like people's adverts for their shops. And they become a real fashion, particularly in the 18th century. And he also does them for other people. So the thing is that to print is to engrave. You're engraving onto a plate. That's the work that you've done. And then somebody else usually does the printing.
And that's when he starts to emerge as an independent artist, beyond just being a craftsman and engraver, an artist with an original interpretation, and with his beliefs expressed through his work. The first famous thing he does, of course, which is now regarded as highly significant and pioneering, is his commentary on the South Sea Bubble. I mean, the South Sea Bubble, people know about it, but it's very important to remember.
The South Sea Bubble was effectively an investment craze A lot of people invested in their company, the South Sea Company, that they thought would make a huge amount of money. There's not much knowledge about how that kind of investments were going to work in the 1720s, and there's also no protection, so there's no sort of limited liability companies or anything like that.
The South Sea Bubble was a company started in 1711 to exploit the potential richness of the Spanish colonies of South America and in the South Seas. It seemed to be a bottomless pit of fortune for those who got in at the start. And so people packed money into buying stocks, but the stocks were worthless because there was nothing there. It was all just hope, credulity, speculation and greed.
And essentially what happens is far too many people put in too much money into a company that is never going to make those returns. And then that bubble burst. And lots of people were ruined because of it.
When the bubble burst, people not only lost their money, but they realised there was corruption amongst the directors, there was corruption amongst the politicians. And so he makes his print, the emblematical print of the South Sea Bubbles. But, 1720, published I think in 1723. And it's a very important work because it's its first big statement about how you can use art to make a commentary. It's a political cartoon and a satire when those things were familiar, but not very familiar. It was, in a way, it's pioneering. And so it shows a scene with a wheel of fortune turning round and people jumping on it. The show he creates is set in the City of London, by the way. It's important. The City of London is always a theatre for his stories. And London is not neutral. It plays a part. Often it's dark and sinister because he loves it, but he realises it's a heartless and unforgiving place. So in this great first print of his, the South Sea Bubble, you have the setting of the city. So St Paul's just completed the dome in the distance, a remote distance, because the scene he's about to show you is not godly. There's a monument, the great fire comes in, the Guildhall, the place of the devil, which is image of Gog and Magog, which are still there, emblems of the City of London. And in front of it is the devil, also in the guise of Father Time, carving up fortune, bodily slicing bits of the body of fortune off and throwing it to the masses. And then you see honour and honesty being tortured and broken by villainy. And you see just greed, and on the merry-go-round is a goat, it's image of lust and greed, saying, who'll ride? And on the merry-go-round or the Wheel of Fortune, or these weird collection of figures, just taking a chance. And in the background there's women queuing up to buy lottery tickets for husbands and so on. It's a world of gambling gone mad. Meanwhile, in the foreground, trade lies sleeping, abandoned. So this is his first big foray into this world of political commentary. It's a success. It has a screed on the bottom explaining it. It's something to pin up and learn from. It's a great moral message against greed, credulity, and so on and so forth, against evils. He shows typical of Hogarth in the foreground and on the trade asleep here on this side. There's three men of God gambling, playing a game. There's, I think, a rabbi, a Catholic, and a Protestant preacher. Basically, the point he's making that the church turns its back on all this suffering, and these men should be saving, looking after their sheep, of just playing games himself and gambling. So he has no mercy for anybody. And he's right, he observed this is what he saw in life. When we talk about 18th century London, it is so important to remember how odd it was in a way. And one of the oddest things was the economy. London's money was made in many ways. The great dock support, the trade with the colonies are beginning to grow. Much work has been done recently on the economy of London in the 18th century, and it seemed pretty clear, certainly was perceived to be the case at the time. The sex industry was a big earner. There were a lot of girls on the streets, and Hogarth, his heart obviously went out to them.
The harlot's progress is how you see the harlot, who is herself a bourgeois figure, comes to London in that, she's come to London, she's very innocent and so on. She is corrupted by the luxury of the rich, and this is the story that you see, and then finally descends into, abject poverty, terrible deprivation.
Hogarth wanted to do was to reveal the humanity of prostitutes, their suffering, and how they were often not responsible. They'd been deluded, they'd been dragged in this terrible world, but through lies and being entrapped and blackmailed and so on and so forth. First plate, famous one where Moll Hackabout arrives. She arrives at the Bell Inn, okay, a pun, the Bell, beautiful girl, the Bell Inn off Cheapside. It's the portal to perdition, of course. And she's on her way clearly to join a family for a respectable life in the city, to come up for the country. And she's approached by a bored procuress, Mrs. Needham. But she's incepted by this woman and she's tempted, and the temptation is obvious. You've got to know a lot about contemporary London life to understand these paintings, because they're full of contemporary references to recent scandals. For example, in that painting, there was a Kate Hackabout who'd been jailed for theft, and she was pursued by a man called Gonson. Gonson was hated. He was a magistrate who was part of the Society of Reformation Manners, and he pursued prostitutes ruthlessly. He appears several times in Hogarth's work. And the Needham, this woman, the procuress, had just been executed, killed by the public a year before. The public hated procuresses. They hated these women because they were prostitutes who aged, and they dragged other girls into their hell for money. Plate 2, painting 2, also in the city, probably Aldgate, Bevis Marks. Here you see Moll has liberated herself from being a courtesan or prostitute with Mother Needham and for Charteris enjoyment, and she's now a kept woman. The scene really is to do with her beginnings of Moll's corruption. You've seen her as innocent. She's obviously rather enjoyed what's happened to her so far. She's had riches, she's got fashionable attire, she hasn't got to work, she's got money, but she does have to entertain the man who's looking after her. If you read this, you see that there's some wealth. There's a page boy. There's evidence that she's been out in the town, masquerades and masquerade balls. There's a mask over here. She's kicking over a table. Is it because she's drunk, or because, this seems to be the reason, she wants to distract her keeper while her lover is being sneaked out of the room in the background? So she's corrupted. The worst thing that happens, I suppose, in Hogarth's view, to an innocent that is betrayed is that they lose their innocence and they lose their lovability. They lose the position they held for being defended because they become unattractive, become not worth fighting for. This is big in Hogarth, the vulnerability, innocence, and time. Time changes, time transforms, time can corrupt.
It's interesting, the beginning of the Harlot, that you see her resisting. And of course it is the pander who leads her on. So she's picked up by the wrong person and then follows that person because she sees them as being, you know, somebody who's got her interests at heart. And that also speaks to the way that society worked. You know, you don't really operate as an individual. You operate within a group of kith and kin and friends. And friends mean something very specific. It doesn't just mean the people you like. It means the people that stand up for you, the people that will help you, the people that helped Hogarth's father, who had to put their hands in their pocket to help him out, and so on. So that's what that really means. So you can understand how the Harlot gets into that position, but she loses her moral standing because she's corrupted by all the excess.
Number 3, fun enough, if you want the narrative of this is where it starts. You lose your innocence, you lose your looks, you lose your health, you become diseased, and you get kicked out. So now she's gone down in the world. This is Covent Garden. She's in a garret. She's not well, there's medicines all over the place. She has a maidservant who's disfigured with syphilis, bits of her body have fallen off, got patches. Incredible narratives in the detail. So it's obviously impoverished, we see that as it's a poor garret. But the main thing is, in the room burst the hated Gonson, the magistrate. He's come to, with bailiffs and constables, they come to arrest her. I mean, prostitution was not illegal, but all the many sides of it were. Keeping it as lordly hours became increasingly an issue. So this guy's coming in, presumably to arrest her for debt or something, to cart her away. But, you know, he's a hated figure for Hogarth because basically Gonson, he thinks of him as a hypocrite. He's a magistrate, but he comes in and he's obviously titillated. Gonson's probably a great user of prostitutes, and so this is what the point Hogarth is making. Those in power are more corrupt than those they persecute, but they get away with it because they're powerful. Now the next one, this is the world that, by the way, Hogarth would have known as a child. These jails is very near the Fleet. She's pounding away at hemp, typical punishment, but she's wearing her fashionable garb, being kind of mocked and bullied by her persecutors there. There are various things going on in this painting. I mean, well, interesting, there's a graffiti of a man, stick man, being hanged in the back there, with Gonson's initials, so hated that someone's done a graffiti of him, being hanged in the room where the women are beating hemp. But essentially we're now beginning on to the moral aspect. Here are the punishments. You're punished in earth as well as heaven, and she's now being punished on earth for her sins, for her transgressions, for being tempted into the terrible world of prostitution. The next one, she's ill, she's dying, she has a child in a chair, her faithful servant remains, doctors are arguing, quacks over various useless medicines for gonorrhea or syphilis. The world is in disorder. Another woman's ransacking her possessions. And then the final one shows the end, which is her death. And it's a strange image because it's a collection of prostitutes mourning her. Most aren't mourning her. Only one girl is looking down. Another prostitute who's clearly thinking, this is me in a year or two's time. So this is the final image of sadness, where this all ends is somewhere not good at all. There is the moral, but also the villain is not moral. The villain is the age in which he lives. The villain is London. The villain, of course, are the procuresses that seduce her, but the real villain are the men that use her and abuse her and cast her aside. That is the story here.
So while the harlot is exploring this woman who is corrupted and kind of has a will, she doesn't resist hard enough, so it's always her fault. On the other hand, there's a reality about how it was for young women who needed to work for a living in London and how they got on.
So, 1733, I suppose, 32, Hogarth is a made man. He's got this tremendous success, Harlot's Progress. It makes a point that's strong to him about the oppression of young women, the silk sex industry, and he makes money. It's popular.
What Hogarth does is he identifies a genre for moral comment, which is completely new. So that's what's really important. And it speaks completely, you can imagine, to this group of polite, middling sort class who've got lots of money, and there's lots of them. I mean, one historian suggests maybe 50% of the population, we might position them within the middling sort. So they may be well off, or they may be aspirant well off. And Hogarth, that's how he begins to build up his reputation as an artist, by producing those sorts of things. So he becomes a kind of household name among those kinds of people.
Since Hogarth realised a lot of his money will come from selling prints of his paintings, his upbringing with his father in Desert Jail and relatively poor means money is important to him. I mean, fair enough. And quickly he realises that the way to earn money, he may do a painting and sell it. What's better still is to do a painting, sell it, and then sell prints of that painting. The problem is that anyone can make copies of his paintings and sell pirated versions of the prints. This is appalling.
In 1710, there had been an act which gave copyright to publishers and authors, and the publishers and authors of books had got together to say, look, we need to have some sort of law to protect our intellectual property and our physical property. Now that's quite important because there was no such thing for images. And this is crucial because Hogarth is really interested in making money for himself. So what he wants to do is to not only license the piece of paper, which is only made valuable, this is one of the things that's said, only made valuable by the ink that's on it, by the image that is on it, but he also wants to make the design, the designer's idea, to also be protected through copyright. And that's the hardest thing, particularly when there's been no copyright for images at all. So it is a real coup that they managed to pull that off. But it's also important that they argue that this will be good for the country as a whole because it will encourage genius. It will encourage ingenuity, it will encourage design, it will encourage all those sorts of things. Whereas young people are not going to be interested in, coming up with all their interesting designs if they get no benefit from it. That's the argument that's made, and it succeeds. Interestingly enough, so on one hand, Hogarth is speaking to the MPs saying what you want is lots of variety, you won't get it unless you actually make it worth our while to be ingenious. On the other hand, he has a real old go at luxurious living in Marriage à la Mode. So here is where we get, the bourgeois Hogarth having a real stab at aristocratic excess.
The first picture, the first image, we've got the paintings here, there were prints of well, of course. It's a simpler story, really. The loveless corruption of the age and creating a loveless marriage, an impoverished aristocrat and earl. It's basically selling his daughter to a rich city merchant. He has money, the earl has status. The earl here is showing his family tree, going back to William the Conqueror and so on and so forth. The city merchant is showing his account, proving how much money he's got. The two children are not in the least interested in each other. They sit at the back of the room, turning away. There's a sad young woman is already being seduced by a man called the Reverend Silvertongue, a kind of hideous... and then again, Hogarth's disdain for the church. This man who's meant to be giving spiritual advice is already starting to kind of debauch the young woman. So the scene is set for this sort of, heartless transaction of these two young people. And then, so the story goes on in fairly time-honoured, predictable way. Inside their Grand West End mansion, the young man has come back from a night on the town, doesn't give a damn about his wife. He's got a broken sword, he's been fighting his mistress, his hat's been tugged from his pocket by the dog. She's been at home gambling, I suppose. The servant looks absolutely fed up with him walking away with a great sheaf of unpaid bills. Point being, loveless marriages lead to this sort of terrible situation. Next one shows the son of the Earl has developed a passion for child prostitutes. An issue of the age. I mean, if we talk about the Foundling Hospital, in which Hogarth gets involved with, started in the late 1730s by Thomas Coram, it's basically inspired by the fact that London is full of children cast adrift. They're mostly children prostitutes, I suppose, but not just a victim of the sex industry, but obviously part of the sex industry. The stories you read, 18th century accounts of sexually active children, very young, in the streets of London remain shocking.
Actually, there was a huge increase in the number of children being abandoned by their families in London, particularly in the kind of like 1730s, 40s and so on.
And this has obviously shocked Hogarth, and he introduces the child prostitute here. She's by now diseased by the Earl, the would-be Earl, the Earl's son here, and he's bringing this girl, what is she, 12? To a quack doctor to try and get some medicine, or to complain about the medicine he's been given not working. It's a dark world. Hogarth's making this point. I say the remorseless predictability about this, because the next one shows her, the Countess now. The father's died, because above the bed is a coronet of an earl. There's a big bed in his alcove. It's a lovely picture, actually, of a mid-18th century grand bedroom. Levy, he was famous, fashionable from the late 17th century, from Baroque France, of receiving your guests in your bedroom in an informal manner. So the bedroom was a big statement. It wasn't where you went to bed, it's where you entertained privately in a relaxed manner. This is like a conversation piece. There's a bed with the Earl's coronet on top of it. She's now the Countess on the floor. Lots of invitations from other grandees inviting her to balls and various things. So she's become a social creature. Having been an innocent city girl, innocent daughter of a city merchant, she's now would-be aristocrat, gambling, going to parties. But the main scene is on the right-hand side, where the Countess is indulging with the same guy. There it is, the Reverend Silvertongue. He's still around, the man who'd whispered in her ear in the first painting when the contracts are being signed. They're now lovers. There's an assignation being passed between the two of them. And so now the thing plays out remorselessly. The next image is the death of the Earl. I mean, though he did not love his wife, though he had no honour for her and behaved dishonourably, he somehow decided that it was dishonourable for her to go off to a bagnio, the Turk's Head. Bagnio, basically a boarding house where you could rent a room for the night. to lie with Reverend Silvertongue. The Earl thought this was obviously bad for his appearances, so he goes along and has a duel and gets killed. And there is Silvertongue escaping out the window. The Countess, now remorseful because he's dying before her eyes. The murderer escapes. It's the final scene. The Earl is dead. She's back at her father's cobwebby house in the city. There's London Bridge with its houses through the window. She's poisoned herself because she cannot take it. And that's basically the end of this sorry tale.
The way that he was doing things in series, telling a narrative story with no words at all, this is what's really, new about the way he was doing this. And all of Marriage à la Mode is really to attack that notion of luxury, luxurious living.
Right, now the Four Stages of Cruelty, dating from 1751, it carries another very, very direct moral message about the evils of cruelty, the cruelty he'd observed inflicted by human beings upon beasts, human beings more beastly than beasts. Obviously, things he saw as a Londoner walking the streets of London, that must have eaten into his heart and soul, and so he produces this series of prints, cheaply made, quite crudely engraved, printed on cheap paper, so they were available to those people he wanted to change. And this is a series of prints trying to educate working people to stop being horrible. And he invents a character, an orphan Tom Nero, and he shows him as a child involved in torturing animals. This is a scene that presumably etched itself into Hogarth's heart during his exploration from London. His cat being thrown from a roof with make-believe wings. You believe he saw that once, So these are innocent children being demonic. It is simple, but it's troubling because, it is to do with the nature of things, where evil comes from, how innocence is lost and so on. Next stage, this is a very, literal sequence through time, cartoon-like. Nero's become a hackney coach driver. Coach overturned because he's loaded it with barristers, too many. They're mean, they want to save money, they're all loaded into one coach. It overturns, the horse's leg is broken, Nero beats the horse. Establishment figures, they represent the law, they do nothing, run away in terror, they don't help the horse. Another man beats a lamb to death, lamb of God, symbol of innocence and so on. Interestingly, one character does take the number of the hackney coach, so Nero can be reported to his master for his appalling cruelty to an animal in the public street. So again, this is presumably things Hogarth saw and was damaged and was heartbroken by in his walks through London, this level of cruelty. Of course, cruelty in perfection, he makes the obvious point that one thing leads to another, things escalate, and Nero has been laid off as a hackney coach driver, become a highwayman, has got involved with some maidservant, persuaded her to steal from her master or mistress, a note explaining this, meets her in a graveyard, kills her, hacks her throat, her hand, she's dead. There is the booty, he's got his pistols, he's a highwayman, he's taken in the act of murder. We're basically being rude, beastly to a dog when you're 10 leads to murder. This is the point that Hogarth is making, this is the moral message here. Final scene, it's interesting and complex, because it touches on the nature of belief in the 18th century. He's been executed at Tyburn, nooses around his neck. He's gone to surgeon's hall, his body's been cut up. The point Hogarth is making here is important to understand. In the 18th century, there's a huge demand for bodies. Doctors want bodies to learn from. Artists want bodies to draw from. Here we see Tom Nero's body being cut up. The point is that in the belief at the time that you would not undergo resurrection at the end of days, your body would not be reassembled by God if the parts were not protected, preserved on consecrated ground, more or less in entirety. They're dispersed, you suffer a second death, death of your body here and the death of your soul in the afterlife. So this was a massive punishment that came in through the Murder Act. Bodies are not available because, for the reasons I've said, people do not want their bodies cut up by doctors. But in the 1750s, the Murder Act is passed, which makes the bodies of murderers, convicted, executed as murderers, available. So murderers do suffer this grisly death. Their bodies are not interred, they're not protected, they're not sanctified. they are killed in the next world, and that's the point that's being made here. It's a terrible fate. There's another little point about Hogarth, I should say, about the bodies, because after going back a little bit, it's important to remember that he's involved. He would have been on a quest for bodies, because after Harlot's progress, a great rise to fame and riches in the mid-1730s, he starts his own art school. So there is a kind of interesting undercurrent in the story, because though he's implying that the horrors of having your body cut up and dispersed and not sanctified, he obviously himself as an artist would have been part and parcel of trying to acquire bodies. Quite curious. So that's a tale being told there. So there's another level to it all of horror. This is the warning. You will end up, if you're cruel like Tom Nero, not only dying in this earth, but dying not being reborn, not at the end of days and last judgment, have an opportunity to be reborn. So, it's a big deal. Cruelty is you're obliterated for eternity. Gin's a big deal. I mean, gin is one of the oddest now. People kind of don't fully understand. I mean, what is gin? Well, gin, it's kind of Dutch, Geneva and so on, but in the early 18th century, it was just a very cheap, strong liquor. You brewed it at home out of anything. Licensing was very peculiar, and essentially you could set up a shop and make this filthy stuff, sell it for nothing, and you get drunk very quickly, and it became this poison, literally poison. But it was regarded as a cause of much evil, of crime, of despondency, of outrageous behaviour in the streets of London, and so on and so forth. It became a big issue. Gin was a killer, killed society, killed people's self-regard. It's how you would now think of a Class A drug, of course, not just destroying people's health, but their willpower. And so this was part of his campaign to control gin. Many people were involved in it.
William Hogarth was very well acquainted with Henry Fielding. They'd worked together since actually quite early on, since the 1730s. And by 1751, which is when Gin Lane and Beer Street are done as a pair, you're supposed to see them together. They're often used very separately. But by that time, Henry Fielding has become a magistrate, Bow Street magistrate, and indeed he is the person who sets up the Bow Street Runners. So, he's quite well known, as well as having been an artist and a writer and all those sorts of things. And Henry Fielding, like many others who have been part of a big campaign since the 1720s, is convinced that the reason why there's a rise in crime and robbery and disease is because the poor are drinking gin. And the gin drinking habits of the poor is bringing disaster to Britain. So Hogarth, in cahoots really with Henry Fielding, decides that he will tell that story in two really quite, astonishing works. And what he wants to do in one, the Gin Lane, is to bring together into one image all the stories that have been told by anti-gin campaigners into one image. So this is not an image of St Giles's, and this is what's really happening there. This is every story that's ever come out of all the campaigning literature, all on one image. So that image is supposed to shock you into thinking, oh my goodness, look what gin is doing to the poor. And of course, what is it that the poor are doing? They're not able to have babies. They're not able to fight the French. They're not loyal because they have no idea what's going on. They are lazy and idle.
And of course, the Gin Act was passed in 1751, just before this print, I think. And that did make gin, basically it controlled its manufacture, its sales, it made it more expensive and therefore less the poison of the poor. The famous one, Gin Lane, you can see from the church, St George's, Bloomsbury by Hawksmoor, this is in St Giles Rookery, which was just to the east of Soho, famous as Rookery is a great slum area. Everything there to do with decay and death. And the only thing prospering is indeed here, pawnbrokers. In the foreground is the skeletal beggar, a woman who's so drunk she didn't notice her child falling to his death. Disorder and chaos behind. Ruin, collapsing buildings, decay and riot produce the product of too much gin. Very simple message.
And I think that one of the most important parts of that image, many people will say this, of course, of the woman who's right at the centre, who isn't drinking gin. She's taking snuff. And what that is an attack on luxury. Because snuff, of course, is a luxury. To have a snuff box, which absolutely everybody has a snuff box in the 18th century. Anybody who wants any kind of sense of fashion at all has got a snuff box. And it's a big one as well. She's got a big one. It's an attack on how dare this poor woman have this kind of luxury. And of course, meanwhile, her baby falls to the ground. And this is absolutely Hogarth's position, political position in life. And we see that in his work. We see him attacking the excesses of the rich in society, and of course we see him attacking what he sees as the excesses of the poor in society. Beer Street, meanwhile, is trying to tell, what do we want our streets to look like? Here's the social order that we really want. So first of all, people should take their refreshment in beer.
Beer, like roast beef, was English. It made you jolly and healthy and happy. It was safe to drink, safer than water, tainted. And so beer is promoted, bringing prosperity and happiness. So you see in the less well-known Beer Street, happy people swigging their great frothing beer. The only building falling down there is the pawnbrokers, which is gin-sodden people selling their possessions to get money to buy gin. So you have a life being lived happily by healthy people, the great fat butcher and blacksmith with their pipes.
Sure enough, the 1751 Act was passed, but I have seen people writing about particularly the Gin Lane image as if somehow it changed society and it changed the way everybody thought about gin. And I'm afraid that the evidence just doesn't stack up.
There are other complex series like Harlot's Progress, Marriage are more simplistic, I say. Then there are these more simplistic, direct, didactic prints, bang, that in your face, to be sold at print shops, in taverns, to ordinary working people. This is propaganda.
By 1751, the numbers of people dying of excess drinking, the peak having been only 69 for an entire year in London, had reduced to a mere 13 in that year. And the amount of gin being produced had been dramatically falling since 1738, while the amount of beer being produced was going up all the time. And there's just no evidence at all that the stories that were being told by Henry Fielding and by William Hogarth are true. Yes, there was an increased crime in London, probably, during this period, and yes, there was increase in disease at that time, but I think that we need to look at the filthy streets, the lack of water, the fact that 350 babies out of 1,000 born would die because of those situations, and the fact that there had been ongoing warfare. 3,000 a year were dying, soldiers were dying. So, you can see here this is a moral, political argument, and it isn't in any way a reflection of what was really happening in London.
Just to reflect upon Hogarth's life, achievements, legacy. So there are these great modern moral series. He develops a strong painting style. We now talk about things being Hogarthian because his observation of London life leads him to make these, not cartoon characters, but these representations of people which are the epitome, the essence of a type of person we imagine. So, this becomes part of his legacy, isn't it? He's the mirror of his age. It's a prism through which we see the 18th century. Strong characters, strong stories.
There's no question that his works were hugely, hugely popular. The Engraving Act was a really important thing. It meant that finally people could get the work paid for, and that there was an appreciation of prints, and suddenly that these were works of art and that they deserved to be paid and they deserved to have people look at them seriously. So I think that's a huge thing that he really helped to change.
He's a campaigner. You read his paintings like books, And they're worth reading because they have things that are worth saying still. The basic things of honesty and decency, fighting for the underdog, giving dignity to working people, and so on and so forth, you know. And it goes through the ages.
I think as a historian, one of the things I most value about Hogarth is the fact that he's trying to show me life. Not as it really was, he's never doing that, but he is showing me all kinds of ways in which people interacted with things, the way they interacted with each other, the kinds of stories that can be told. That's fantastic.
But Hogarth's so much more, so he's a man with a moral message, like his art.